I've been thinking about the creative process and those of us who are engaged by it for over 20 years. It's the heart of what I care about most as an artist and a teacher. So in 2009, I enrolled in a creativity coaching program with Eric Meisel, an expert in the field as far as creativity is concerned. And it was fine. I learned some interesting things from him and from that program. But then there came this reading list. And of the 20 books on the reading list, none was newer than 10 years old. Most of them were older than that. But I was game and I started reading, and I got through about half of the assigned books, but it just wasn't working for me. So at that point, I had to ask myself why. There were two things about it I realized as I sort of considered why it wasn't appealing to me. One was that all the authors, for the most part, were male, except for just one book written by a feminist artist in the 70s. For instance, there wasn't any mention of Julia Cameron or The Artist's Way. And the other thing about it is that the books were mainly oriented toward business. They weren't toward the creativity that I think of when I think of what we do as artists or as makers. So I dropped out of the program. I couldn't believe thinking on creativity hadn't been evolving, or that the program wasn't documenting it, and I was disappointed, but life was really busy and I got busy with other things, as we all do. But it kept percolating in my head. The doubts about not being engaged by the course wouldn't go away. So I would find myself thinking about other books, Wabi Sabi, Art and Fear, The Artist's Way, The War of Art. These are all really great books that weren't on that list. And a lot of them are books that have influenced my own thinking and development, not only as an artist, but also as a teacher or a guide, which is how I think of myself. So I thought of those titles, and I knew that the field was changing and it was evolving, and I also knew this: evolution is not selective. If one thing evolves, then everything evolves. For example, let's take art. One school or style pushes back on the next, and so that is how art movements proceed, isn't it? Impressionism pushed against one version of what existed before it. Abstract expressionism pushed back against what preceded it. And this isn't only true of art movements. It's true of thought fields. It's true of how psychology is evolving. It's true of religion. It's true of society. It's true of politics. But we won't go there. Not right now. So I thought, here's the point, I thought about dropping out of the program, out of the training a lot. And I did. Eventually I realized not getting the creativity coaching program and feeling disconnected, the real problem was that it made me feel like a failure. It made me feel very vulnerable. And all I could think was that I must not have been smart enough, or I wasn't attentive enough, or maybe I should have actually contacted Dr. Meisel and asked him for help. Maybe I hadn't paid enough attention to the messages in the books as I was reading them. Could it be that I was such a diehard feminist that I was missing the general message on creativity because the majority of the readers or the writers were male? This is one thing we do as human beings. We make it about us. So of course, if there was a failure, it had to be my fault. I obsessed over this perceived failure a long time. Not all the time, but I thought about it on a recurring basis. Most of the time, if I go out after something, I'm pretty good at succeeding. So I finally came to this unexpected realization, which was that understanding my vulnerability was actually a lot more important than finishing the training that I had started. I continued to think about vulnerability, and I came to the conclusion that it isn't a feeling we can ever escape as humans. We encounter it every time, especially as artists, that we start down a new path or learn a new skill or otherwise open ourselves to facing reality squarely. The creative well can always dry up. We're afraid of that. We might have periods of feeling lost or misdirected. It's hard to talk about it because there's this uncertainty around it. And you cannot logic your way out of this, no matter how hard you try. So your best strategy is to cultivate stamina. And to me, that has come to mean showing up despite the fear and the vulnerability. Trust is a really big part of cultivating stamina because you have to choose to believe you'll continue to be creative, that you can learn the new skills you need, that showing up will lead to mastery even when you feel like a beginner or you feel way less than masterful. You have to cultivate ultimate trust in yourself. And it is achingly hard. Achingly hard. I lay in bed some mornings and I think about my day and the time, the energy level I might feel, and then my mind goes to people I know who are struggling or sick. It's easy to chastise myself and to feel guilty. I ask myself whether I realize what a luxury it is to go to the studio when other people are going to dead-end jobs, or they're going to war, or they're going to court, or maybe they're going to the hospital. It feels frivolous, and yet it's powerful to go into the studio, send up a prayer for a good day, and get to work. Those good days, and even the not-so-good days, raise energy. And you know what? That energy ripples out into the world through my art and my writing, and I believe it makes a difference somewhere. But it isn't only me. And even when I can't see it and I never know it, it's there, and everyone's artwork and energy is capable of doing the same thing because it's cumulative. There's a Jackson Browne song I love called For a Dancer, and the last verse sums it up for me. It goes like this: keep a fire for the human race. Let your prayers go drifting into space. You never know what will be coming down. Perhaps a better world is drawing near, and just as easily, it can all disappear, along with whatever meaning you might have found. Don't let the uncertainty turn you around. Go on and make a joyful sound. So I say it's a choice to show up and make a joyful sound. And it's a choice to take what you make seriously. And as these realizations settled into me, not as a result of signing up for the creativity coaching course, but maybe through the realization that was triggered by failing it or failing at it, I decided to focus on authentic making and figure out what that meant for me. And that has led to developing strategies which I would now like to offer for your consideration. I've made the first point: choose to show up, because showing up is all by itself a key to a couple of other really great realizations. The more you show up, the better you feel about yourself, because you're doing what you said you would do, and this raises our levels of self-respect. When my daughter was a little girl, and that's her on the right, by the way, you get a sense right there from looking at her, I was a single mother and I had to pick my battles. The one way that I dealt with my smart, strong-willed daughter was to say to her when she had done something that I really needed to address or reprimand or punish, she would be mightily complaining to me, and I would say, hey, I don't like this either. I am your mother and this is my job. I signed up for it, and I am not a slacker. So that's what you say to yourself. I said I would do this, and I am going to do it. I'm going to walk in the door to my studio and see what's what. Which is not only the first step to generating self-respect, it's the first step in building what I have now begun to think of as creative stamina. Synonyms for stamina include endurance, staying power, fortitude, you see it here, strength, toughness, tenacity, determination, perseverance, and grit. And we all know about stamina as it pertains to athletes. It's what keeps them training to win competitions, run marathons, and like my beloved San Antonio Spurs, garner NBA titles, one after another. Trainers teach athletes various exercises in order to facilitate what we call cross-training, and that means one session, one exercise, the next session, something else. Cross-training builds athletic ability so the athlete is strong in every possible way, physically and mentally. And if we embrace that concept in the world of creating, if we think about that as it relates to making, then we can think of ways to train as artists. And instead of athletic strength training, we're then working on artists' strength training. So in the same way that athletes cross-train, artists cross-train. For us, it means working in more than one medium to keep ideas flowing and the brain sharp, but it also means adding other cross-training exercises. And that shapes up as writing. It looks like this. We're all familiar with journaling. Many of you have worked through the artist's way, so this idea isn't new to you. But let's focus on it from another angle. Our brains have the ability to function simultaneously in different areas. When I'm making something, for example, screen printing is one thing I love to do. My unconscious mind is cranking along below the surface or behind my eyes. Writing about my creation later taps thoughts that might have been rising up around the periphery of the physical making. But if I don't write that idea down, I might lose it. And conversely, I could start with guided writing, lists, free association, etc. If I don't know how to get started, I could discover ideas that would not have ever been obvious if I hadn't been willing to engage the writing, which then captures them. So the strategy is first to engage in one activity, making, and then engage in another activity, writing, or vice versa. But either way, we engage both modes of activity as a form of cross-training, and by alternating them, our ability to be intentional, conscious artists is strengthened. So cross-training is good. What else works? How about actively engaging your rebel? Here's the story on that. So archetypes are symbolic patterns that give us a shorthand for understanding human behavior patterns. We use the language all the time. We don't even realize we're doing it. I learned what I know about archetypes from the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. It was 30 years ago. And most recently from Caroline Myss, who is a contemporary spiritual theorist. An example of an archetype is when we describe somebody's qualities and everybody knows exactly what the description means without an explanation. So when someone calls me an Earth Mother, you know what they mean. If we say he acted like a knight in shining armor, everyone gets it. It's a fascinating topic, and I love to talk about it, and we could spend all day just working on that. But suffice it to say, we all have a little bit of rebel archetype in us. Joan of Arc here before us. If the rebel doesn't activate when we're children, then it activates when we hit puberty, because that's when we need to start preparing mentally and physically to leave our parents and become adults. The rebel might go silent as we mature. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But in any event, one strategy we can employ is to activate the rebel after puberty and invite it to partner with the artist's self in order to help protect or form sacred space for creating. But there are a lot of things that get in the way, and you know it. You know the list before I even share it. Housework, lunches out, obligations to family, friends and relatives' well-meaning but critical advice, procrastination. Your rebel can help you deal with each of those. Obligations to family, we can't get away from that. We have aging parents, we have young children, we have friends who need our help. This is always more important than making. But it should never discount making so that we lose the part of ourselves that is rejuvenated through that process. So one thing the rebel can help us do is recognize what I now call the committee. This is my committee, and they're pasted up there in kind of a loose way because this is not meant to be about any one of the people on the screen. My dad's on the right. You may recognize the other three. You have to ask yourself, do you hear voices or do you see faces? Either way, the most important thing to acknowledge about the committee is that you put them there. They might be shocked or find it hilarious to realize they're on your committee, but it's important to acknowledge them, and it's important to ask yourself why they're there. These people are on my committee because I so desperately, at various stages of my life, wanted to please them. I wanted Nancy Crow to think highly of my teaching and of my artwork. I wanted my father to validate me. And so part of what the committee does is point out to us who we're working for and why it's important. But the committee can also shut us down by standing around the studio door and refusing to allow us go in because we don't think we're going to be good enough, or gathering around the table and making comments, oh, that's not very good, ooh, why did you make that color choice? And so this is the downside of the committee. What we want to do is dismantle the committee. We need to dismantle the committee because in the long run, if we are going to be our authentic artist selves, our own opinion is the only opinion that should count. And so now writing comes in handy. The cross-training is paying off because nothing dismantles a committee faster than writing down the members' names and analyzing why they're there, coming to peace with it, or recognizing that you need a major act here of dismissal, in which case you can write each person a letter rejecting them and removing them from your committee. Not that you would ever send the letter, you might decide to burn it. And you got to be aware of this. The committee may revisit from time to time, and it isn't a big deal. A great therapist said to me once, this stuff never goes away. The best you can hope for, Jane, is that it will neutralize. When you recognize your buttons are being pushed, which is what committee members do, then you'll be able to see it, deal with it, and recover from it faster than would have been true in the past. Another student suggested another strategy, which is to replace the committee, dismiss them all, and then invite in your support team. Those are the cheerleaders. Who can you trust to be there for you no matter what? The support team doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be compassionate and reliable. So you're in good hands at this point because you're in your own hands. The rebel's riding shotgun, you've dismantled or made peace with your committee. You might rebelliously choose to leave dishes in the sink and get right to the studio. You might leave the bed unmade. You might elect to elicit help from your support staff in order to carve out more time for making. Your rebellion might be to clean up. Some people have said that they leave the house in such disarray they can't think straight and therefore they're never creative. In that case, your rebel is commanding you to pick up the broom and the dustpan. So what's next? What's next is alignment. Alignment means, in this context, what you love to do and what you're good at doing. And writing sorts it out. If you make lists and figure out what you need to get better at doing, then you'll be able to figure out how to go after alignment in earnest, and you will reach a point when you love what you are doing and it is segueing with what you are good at doing. As part of alignment, you might need to cast off a process or a tool or a material. You might be done with it. A former student and friend who indicated that although she was really great at piecing and she knew how to match corners, she was completely done with piecing. Sick of it, no return. It's hard to leave that behind. It means you have to embrace something new. But you have to dump obligations to finish things or stick with what you used to do because this is why goodwill exists. You can give it away. But the more important thing is to clear out space so you can think, because this is when new ideas enter in. Aligned work needs space to manifest. Next, make time and take time to work on the subject of your alignment. And notice this clock has no hands. Don't rush through projects or pieces. There's already enough bad art in the world. Part of the reason bad art happens isn't that the person wasn't any good. It's not that. It's too often the result of not slowing down enough to sink into process. You don't need to make a gazillion objects a year unless your living is derived from selling what you make. You can focus on doing one piece at a time and doing it really well. You may still be extremely productive, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just that too many of us seem to think that it's a race to produce work. And we've got this race going on, and we don't put the care or the thought into our creations that they deserve. And it always shows. Work looks undeveloped, sloppy, or is just plain boring. It's your time and your diligence that we're talking about here. So show respect for yourself and give your work the time and attention it deserves. This is another form of self-respect. In the process of slowing down and spending quality time with your processes or techniques, and perhaps studying in order to improve upon what you're making, you can begin to think about what makes your work distinctive. At one time, this property was a very small house, and the entire lot was covered with birdhouses, all made by one man. This was his passion. This was his distinctive work. It was a little heartbreaking, eventually, to drive by the house and find only this stand remaining and a for sale sign in front. But back there to what's distinctive. It's a hard reality, but it's true. Rarely does technique make something distinctive, because anybody can learn to paint on silk or canvas. Anybody can learn to bind up shibori or dye fabric or paint with acrylics or carve marble. What makes work distinctive is the combination of processes you assemble, your approach to color or pattern, the garment shape the shibori becomes. It's the twist you put on materials that makes your work distinctive. And if your work is not material driven, if that aspect is not distinctive, then it's very possible that it's the content that makes your work recognizably you. You may not know how to do what I think of as mining for meaning. That's what I call working on content. But you can do it, and guess what? It's through writing. Make lists about what you care about, read through what you've written. Are there topics that literally jump off the page because they are from your heart and soul? And by the way, I'm not just talking about war or poverty or homelessness or big issues, although those are certainly topics somebody cares about and is using as content. But everything counts. Beauty is in there. Appreciation for the world around you. Color, line, and shape. What we care about is what we care about. It's not predictable. It's personal. When you figure out what you care about, then you can do free association exercises to various words. For me, one time it was boundaries. Then you look at what you've written and pick out the words that are visual, and there will always be words that could become visual. And it's just one short leap to making the tools. For me, boundaries led to birds on a wire, maps, and from there to other images that were already visual. Then it was just a matter of how I was going to put those all together stylistically and incorporate them into the series that I envisioned. And if you've got content that's elusive, hope, or grief, or sadness, keep free associating and see where the words lead. Or play with representing a concept using a process that you already love. Eventually, you will get to a place where images mean something or colors are symbolic, which was always true of the work of Rothko. If you pay attention, your start might be scratchy or clumsy, but the content is there. Okay, now, what about the elephant in the room, perfection? What does perfection look like to you? And let's be clear here, I'm talking about perfection, not perfectionism. If you can answer the question of what perfection looks like, you can develop strategies to seek it, because it is a component of alignment. If you know what you're good at and you know what you like to do, then you can determine what is required to support the quest, even if it starts with small baby steps. And I'll share my definition of perfection with you. My definition is for the image that I have in my head to align with the image I've created with my hands. That's quite different from perfection judged by the outside. So we're really talking about perfection or satisfaction with work judged from the inside. And what's the goal? The goal is to be authentically confident of who you are. You are a complex mix of experiences and ideas that will never be replicated on the face of the planet. Check out the truth of this. It forces you to embrace who you are and the potential you have as your artist self to connect to others and to inspire and influence them, and to be a force for good in the world. This is a portion of verse 39 from the Tao Te Ching, the Stephen Mitchell translation. The master's constant practice is humility. She doesn't glitter like a jewel, but lets herself be shaped by the Tao, as rugged and common as stone. Which is where grace finally enters stage right. Grace is described by Webster's dictionary as simple elegance, but also described as the bestowal of blessings. But my experience is that grace is a rebel unto itself and can't be forced or reckoned with. We can only cultivate an environment in which grace settles over us. This is a poem called The Way It Is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die. You suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Holding onto the thread means entertaining the artist and rebel and dismissing those who were on the committee. In fact, even forgiving them. Next, we forgive ourselves for not being smart enough or fast enough or brave enough. We surrender to the reality of who we are. We accept and welcome our struggles and our desires to be distinctive. We make a pact with ourselves to align our gifts with our cultivated strengths. And then we cherish ourselves by embracing simultaneously our authenticity and our imperfections, and by remembering the words of Suzuki Roshi. You are perfect the way you are, and you need a little work. We keep working, and occasionally, often with great surprise and delight, we experience grace as expressed in this poem by Rumi. The universe came into being gradually over 6 days. God could just have commanded, be. Little by little, a person reaches 40 and 50 and 60 and feels more complete. God could have thrown full-blown prophets flying through the cosmos in an instant. Jesus said one word and a dead man sat up. But creation unfolds like calm breakers. Constant slow movement teaches us to keep working like a small creek that stays clear, that doesn't stagnate, but finds a way through numerous details, deliberately. Deliberation is born of joy, like a bird from an egg. Birds don't resemble eggs. Think how different the hatching out is. A white leathery snake egg, a sparrow's egg, a quince seed, an apple seed. Very different things look similar at one stage. These leaves, our bodily personalities, seem identical. But the globe of soul fruit we make, each is elaborately unique. You are elaborately unique. Claim it, celebrate it, and support it in those around you. It is a privilege to be an artist on the planet.